Emmanuel sat in the dim glow of his study, a faint amber light spilling over the polished oak desk where his fingers traced the grain absent-mindedly. Outside, the city of Akua hummed under a blanket of darkness, the distant sounds of traffic and faint laughter from late-night revelers rising to meet his window. His mansion, perched on the outskirts, seemed like a world apart, silent, grand, and yet, tonight, unbearably hollow. He was no stranger to late nights, to the quiet solitude that had once been a comfort. But tonight, that silence felt different, as though it was waiting to whisper something he couldn't quite hear. The flicker of doubt had been small at first, a stray thought born of an overheard conversation at the golf club. The words had been light, veiled in laughter, but they lingered like an aftertaste he couldn't rid himself of. Ah, Emmanuel, now that man? He knows how to pick them young and beautiful, doesn't he? But I wonder if she's as in love with him as she is with his millions. Funny how easily love and wealth mix, isn't it? The laughter had followed, casual yet edged with a skepticism that stuck to his skin like grime. And now, sitting in the glow of his study, that question echoed louder than he'd like to admit. Vanessa had been a ray of warmth when she entered his life, illuminating spaces within him he'd long thought empty. But he could not shake that nagging, insidious question. Was her love real, or was she, like so many others before, drawn to the life he could offer? He closed his eyes, envisioning her as she'd looked just this morning. She'd been sitting by the breakfast window, her dark curls tumbling over her shoulders as she laughed at something on her phone. She was radiant, youthful in a way that made him feel protective and cautious all at once. Her laughter had sounded genuine, her smile unforced, yet now, sitting alone, his mind tainted by suspicion, he found himself questioning everything. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Emmanuel's eyes opened as he straightened, a hand brushing over his face to erase any sign of weakness. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Gabriel stepped in, his presence as unassuming as always. Gabriel was Emmanuel's driver, a man of quiet loyalty and discretion, with a steady gaze that spoke of years of witnessing lives unfold in the back of his car. His eyes were wise, carrying the sort of gentle understanding that had made him Emmanuel's trusted confidant over the years. "Sir," Gabriel greeted with a respectful nod. "You called for me?" Emmanuel's gaze softened, the weight of the moment pulling him back to reality. He motioned for Gabriel to sit, a silent invitation that betrayed a certain vulnerability Emmanuel rarely showed. Gabriel's expression turned curious but remained respectful as he eased into the chair opposite the desk, his cap balanced on his knee. "Gabriel," Emmanuel began, his voice low, "tell me something honestly." He paused, as if the words themselves were fragile, something that could shatter at the slightest mishandling. "Do you think Vanessa loves me? I mean, truly loves me?" Gabriel's brows knitted together in surprise, but he recovered quickly, his gaze thoughtful as he chose his words. "Sir, I've seen the way she looks at you. She has a warmth in her eyes, a softness, if I may say so, that doesn't come easily. To my knowledge, she's been nothing but devoted." Emmanuel nodded, a fleeting sense of relief rising in his chest, only to be quickly drowned by that lingering shadow of doubt. He'd heard enough over the years, seen enough betrayals, that he knew affection could be as deceptive as fog, thick and obscuring, yet gone with the first light. "People can be skilled at masking their true intentions," Emmanuel murmured, almost to himself, his fingers curling around the edge of the desk. "I need to be sure, Gabriel. I can't just leave this to chance." Gabriel's mouth opened slightly, hesitation glinting in his eyes as he tried to gauge his employer's intent. "You're thinking of testing her, aren't you?" Emmanuel's gaze turned steely, resolute. "It's the only way. I can't live my life wondering if she's here because of me or because of what I can give her." Gabriel looked away, his brow furrowing as he weighed his response. "Sir, forgive me if I speak out of line, but trust is fragile. Sometimes the need to test it does more harm than simply believing in it." Emmanuel's eyes hardened slightly, a flicker of frustration flashing across his face. "I've been a fool before, Gabriel, and I don't intend to be one again. I need to know." His voice grew softer, laced with a vulnerability Gabriel had never seen. "She has my heart, Gabriel, all of it, and I need to know it's safe with her." The silence settled over them, heavy and contemplative. Gabriel shifted in his seat, the loyalty he felt for Emmanuel at war with a sense of foreboding. He had been by Emmanuel's side long enough to see what ambition and pride had cost him over the years, and yet he understood the fear Emmanuel was trying to hide, the terror of loving deeply and being left in the end. "If you're sure about this," Gabriel finally said, his voice quiet but resolute, "then I'll help you. Just be careful. Sometimes the answers we seek come at a price we're not prepared to pay." Emmanuel nodded, a grim determination settling in his gaze. "Thank you, Gabriel. I won't take this lightly." Gabriel inclined his head, but Emmanuel could see the unease lingering in his friend's eyes, a silent warning that only sharpened his resolve. He couldn't shake the feeling that this test was necessary, that it would bring him the peace he needed. The next morning, Emmanuel called Alex, his trusted lawyer and longtime friend. Alex was as sharp as he was discreet, with a mind as cunning as the men Emmanuel often competed against. When Emmanuel explained his intentions, Alex leaned back in his leather chair, a wry smile playing at the edges of his mouth. "You're serious about this?" Alex's tone was both skeptical and intrigued. "I've known you a long time, Emmanuel, but I never took you for a man to gamble on love." Emmanuel gave a humorless laugh. "This isn't about gambling, it's about clarity. I can't afford to let my heart lead me astray, not again." Alex regarded him for a moment, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. "And if she fails this test of yours, what then?" Emmanuel's gaze grew distant, his voice barely a whisper. "Then I'll know, and I'll move forward, alone if necessary." The words hung in the air, laden with the finality of a man who had already made up his mind. Alex nodded, understanding the unspoken weight of the conversation. "Very well, then let's plan this right," Alex replied, his voice taking on a shrewd edge. "If this test is to reveal her true intentions, it must feel real. We'll orchestrate a financial setback, something sudden yet believable, enough to rattle her, but not enough to ruin you, of course." Emmanuel's lips curved into a small, humorless smile. "Let's start small. A business deal gone wrong, perhaps, something that makes her question her future with me." "Consider it done," Alex agreed, already sketching out the details in his mind. "But I'll warn you, Emmanuel, you're playing with fire. People have a way of surprising you." Emmanuel's eyes flashed with a blend of apprehension and resolve. "That's what I'm counting on." And so the plan was set into motion, a web of deception woven carefully to test the truth Emmanuel so desperately sought. The stakes were high, but Emmanuel was willing to risk everything to uncover what lay beneath the veneer of love that surrounded him. The air in Emmanuel's office felt thick with tension as he paced, phone in hand, his mind racing over his plan. The morning light streamed through the large windows, but the warmth of the sun did little to ease the chill of uncertainty creeping over him. He'd barely slept the night before, his thoughts weighed down by the risk he was about to take. Testing Vanessa's love was a gamble, but he needed to know for certain if their marriage was built on something real or merely illusions. Finally, he dialed the number he'd been contemplating for hours. Alex, his longtime lawyer and close friend, picked up on the first ring, his voice brisk and professional as always. "Emmanuel," Alex greeted, a hint of curiosity in his tone. "What's going on? You don't usually call this early." Emmanuel took a steadying breath, closing his eyes for a moment as he gathered his thoughts. "Alex, I need your help with something. Sensitive." There was a pause on the other end. Alex knew Emmanuel well enough to pick up on the weight behind his words. "What do you need, Emmanuel?" "It's Vanessa," he began, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. I need to know if her love is genuine or if she's here for what I can offer her. And I don't think I'll ever know unless I test her." "Test her?" Alex repeated, a slight edge of disbelief in his voice. "Emmanuel, that sounds risky. You're playing with fire here." "I know," Emmanuel admitted, his gaze drifting to a framed photograph on his desk, a candid shot of him and Vanessa on their honeymoon, laughing as they stood on the beach. "But I can't keep doubting her like this. I've had too many betrayals, Alex. I need certainty. I thought you'd understand." There was silence for a moment as Alex considered this, then he sighed. "All right. But if you want to go down this path, it has to feel real. A simple rumor or minor setback won't be enough to shake her. If you want to test her loyalty, you'll need to make her believe you're truly at risk of losing everything." Emmanuel nodded, his mind already racing with ideas. Exactly. I want her to feel the weight of it, to question what her life with me would be like without the security my success provides. Let's stage a business failure, something unexpected that would make her think my entire empire could crumble. Alex's voice turned cautious. This will require some finesse. If we're not careful, this could backfire. The last thing we want is for her to feel cornered or manipulated. Are you sure about this? Emmanuel's gaze hardened. I'm sure. I can't keep living in doubt. If she loves me, she'll stand by me through this. And if she doesn't, then I need to know that now. Alex sighed again, though there was a hint of resignation in his tone. All right, I'll help you, but let's do this with some precision. We'll manufacture a sudden downturn, a stalled deal, whispers of bankruptcy. I'll have my team handle the paperwork and set up a realistic scenario. Good, Emmanuel said, relief mixing with the tension in his chest. I knew I could count on you. And Emmanuel, Alex added, his voice tinged with concern, remember that people don't react well when they feel betrayed or manipulated. Even if Vanessa is true to you, this might still hurt her. Emmanuel brushed the warning aside. He was too consumed by the fear gnawing at him to let doubt hold him back now. Thank you, Alex. I'll keep that in mind. Later that evening, Emmanuel returned home, feeling the weight of his decision settling over him like a storm cloud. Vanessa was already waiting in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a book in her lap, looking serene and content. She glanced up as he entered, her face lighting up with a warm smile. Long day? She asked, setting the book aside and rising to meet him. He forced a smile, hoping she wouldn't notice the strain behind it. You could say that. He kissed her lightly on the forehead, feeling a pang of guilt in his chest. There's a lot happening at the office right now, some challenges. She reached for his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. You'll get through it, Emmanuel. You always do. He nodded, though her words only served to deepen the doubt in his mind. Could she feel the same way if his empire truly began to crumble? He hated that he couldn't trust her faith in him, but the plan was already in motion. There was no turning back. The next few days were tense, the atmosphere in the house growing heavier as Emmanuel's fabricated financial crisis took shape. Whispers of a failed deal circulated in business circles, with talk of his company's sudden downturn spreading through Akua like wildfire. Vanessa began to notice the shift. Business calls that ended in frustration, hurried meetings, tense conversations he'd have just out of earshot. Emmanuel did everything he could to make the story believable, and Alex made sure that even his closest associates were in on the deception. One night, as they sat down for dinner, Vanessa hesitated before asking, "Is everything okay, Emmanuel? You seem different." He forced a weary smile, feigning exhaustion. It's just work. Things aren't going as planned, and there's a lot on the line. I'm doing everything I can to hold things together. Her brow furrowed in concern, and she reached across the table to place her hand on his. I'm here for you, Emmanuel, no matter what happens. The words should have reassured him, but they only left him feeling hollow. Was her promise genuine, or was it simply an automatic response to a man she thought could always offer security? He didn't know anymore, and it ate at him. That evening, as Emmanuel prepared to head to bed, he caught Gabriel by the staircase. His driver's face was lined with concern, and Emmanuel could tell that the weight of the situation was beginning to affect him too. Are you certain about this, sir? Gabriel asked quietly, glancing towards the closed door of the master bedroom. This is a lot to put her through, even if it's only temporary. Emmanuel's jaw tightened. I need to know, Gabriel. I need to know that she's here for me, not just the lifestyle I provide. Gabriel sighed, nodding reluctantly. Understood, sir. Just be careful. You might lose more than you expect if this doesn't go as planned. Emmanuel's gaze darkened, his resolve hardening. I'm willing to take that risk. Better to face the truth now than to live a lie. With that, he headed upstairs, feeling the weight of his actions settle on his shoulders. The house was silent as he lay down beside Vanessa, who had already fallen asleep, her face peaceful in the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains. Emmanuel watched her, the nagging question echoing in his mind once more. Was this love real, or just a shadow cast by wealth? In the days that followed, he would begin to find his answer, an answer that would come at a price neither of them had foreseen. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a faint golden light over Akua as Emmanuel's financial crisis entered its next phase. Word of his business setback had spread beyond his circle, reaching the ears of those who took pleasure in his apparent misfortune. Rumors of his empire's instability circulated in the city's elite circles, leaving Emmanuel feeling both vulnerable and strangely exhilarated by the reality of his deception. Vanessa, meanwhile, had grown increasingly concerned, her demeanor changing as she adjusted to the shifts in their lifestyle and in Emmanuel himself. Every morning, he felt her watching him a little longer, her expression troubled as she sensed something deeper than he was willing to share. But he stayed guarded, intent on preserving the illusion of crisis. Little did he know, however, that he was not the only one watching. Across town, Daniel Mensa, one of Emmanuel's longtime competitors, sat in his own lavish office, sipping coffee and relishing the news of Emmanuel's supposed downfall. Daniel was a cunning businessman who had always envied Emmanuel's success. Though they'd crossed paths at events and even exchanged polite words, their rivalry was unmistakable. To Daniel, Emmanuel's vulnerability presented a rare opportunity, one he would not let slip by. "Emmanuel Mensa," he muttered, a smirk tugging at his lips, "the mighty finally fall." With a few quick calls, he began gathering intel, aiming to understand the extent of Emmanuel's situation. Daniel's plan was simple. He would offer Vanessa a sympathetic ear and use her position to unravel more of Emmanuel's affairs. He suspected that if he could exploit the growing tension between them, he might gain an inside track on how to dismantle Emmanuel's empire, piece by piece. As the days passed, Vanessa became increasingly alarmed by Emmanuel's behavior. His once confident demeanor had turned cold and distant, his warm smiles replaced by tense expressions. They no longer laughed over breakfast or shared intimate conversations late into the night. Emmanuel seemed to be closing himself off, and it was beginning to wear on her. One evening, Vanessa decided to confront him. She found him in his study, his face buried in his hands as he stared at the paperwork strewn across his desk. The light in the room was dim, casting shadows that seemed to deepen the lines of worry on his face. "Emmanuel?" she called softly, her voice tinged with concern. He looked up, startled, his expression hardening as he quickly composed himself. "Vanessa, what is it?" She hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. I just wanted to check on you. You've been so withdrawn lately. I know things have been hard, but I'm here for you. You don't have to go through this alone." Emmanuel forced a sigh, looking away. "It's just complicated, Vanessa. You wouldn't understand." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then help me understand. Whatever it is, we can face it together." Emmanuel's gaze softened for a brief moment, a flicker of the love they once shared glimmering in his eyes. But the doubt returned quickly, and he pulled away, his walls back up. "I appreciate that, Vanessa, but I don't want you to worry. This is my burden to bear." Her heart sank, but she nodded, sensing that pushing further would only drive him further away. She left him in the study, retreating to their bedroom with a growing ache in her chest. She lay awake that night, wondering if this was how their life would be, trapped in an invisible cage of secrets and silences. The following day, Vanessa attended a charity gala alone, an event she had initially planned to attend with Emmanuel. She felt out of place without him by her side, her mind drifting back to his distant gaze and the tension that now seemed to define their lives. Just as she was about to leave, she spotted a familiar face moving toward her with an easy, charming smile, Daniel Mensa. "Vanessa," he greeted, extending a hand. "It's been too long." She forced a polite smile, though she felt uneasy. "Hello, Daniel. Yes, it has." "Are you here alone tonight?" he asked, his gaze softening with feigned sympathy. "I was expecting to see Emmanuel with you." Her face faltered for a moment before she recovered, nodding. "Yes, he couldn't make it." Daniel raised an eyebrow, his expression laced with subtle curiosity. "I've heard there have been some challenges for him recently. I can only imagine how hard it must be for both of you." Vanessa forced a smile, keeping her tone light. "It's just business. Things like this happen." "Of course," Daniel replied, his voice gentle, though a glint of something sharper lingered in his eyes. "But remember, if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands the complexities of this world, I'm just a call away." She managed a small nod, though the unease in her stomach grew. She excused herself and left the event early, her mind buzzing with questions and suspicions. Something about Daniel's concern felt unsettling, as if he knew more about their troubles than he was letting on. She made a mental note to keep her distance, yet as she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a web she couldn't see. Back at home, Gabriel noticed the strain weighing on Vanessa. As Emmanuel's loyal driver, he had seen the toll this test was taking on her. He felt a growing sense of guilt, torn between his duty to Emmanuel and his empathy for Vanessa, who was visibly struggling. Over the next few days, he found himself offering her small gestures of comfort, a reassuring nod, a gentle, "Are you all right, madam?" though he stopped short of breaking Emmanuel's trust. One afternoon, as he drove Vanessa back from an errand, she sighed deeply, staring out the window as the city blurred past. "Gabriel," she began, her voice soft, "do you ever wonder why people do the things they do? Why they hurt the ones they claim to love?" Gabriel's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his heart heavy. He chose his words carefully, knowing how delicate the situation was. "Sometimes, madam, people hurt others because they're afraid. They think they're protecting themselves, even if it means causing pain." Vanessa turned to him, her expression searching. "But isn't that selfish? Isn't love supposed to be more than that?" Gabriel's gaze softened. "It is, madam, but love can be complicated. Fear has a way of making us act in ways we wouldn't otherwise." She nodded, her eyes drifting back to the window, lost in thought. His words resonated, and for a brief moment she felt a glimmer of understanding. But it was quickly replaced by the weight of her own suspicions, her heart aching as she wondered what secrets Emmanuel was hiding. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his plans, reaching out to Vanessa more frequently under the guise of concern. He would send her casual messages, expressing worry over Emmanuel's crisis and subtly suggesting she deserved better. Over time, he positioned himself as a comforting presence, a confidant who saw her struggles and was willing to listen. Though Vanessa was wary, the distance growing between her and Emmanuel left her vulnerable, and Daniel knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. At home, Emmanuel sensed the strain in Vanessa's demeanor, but convinced himself that this was the only way to find the truth. He ignored the gnawing guilt in his chest, choosing instead to focus on maintaining the illusion of his financial ruin. He had no idea that his plan was beginning to spiral beyond his control, drawing in players he hadn't anticipated. One evening, as Vanessa sat alone in their dimly lit living room, her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Just checking in. I hope you're all right. Remember, you don't have to face this alone." She hesitated, feeling the weight of her isolation pressing down on her. Emmanuel was more distant than ever, and Gabriel's quiet kindness could only go so far. For a brief, conflicted moment, she considered replying. As Vanessa hovered over the reply button, Emmanuel walked in, his gaze landing on her tense expression. She quickly put her phone down, her heart pounding as she met his eyes, wondering if he would notice the distance between them, a distance that was only growing. The seeds of deception had been planted, but Emmanuel was about to learn the painful truth about trust. Sometimes the very test meant to strengthen it could be the one to tear it apart. The strain in the house was palpable. Days turned into weeks, and Emmanuel continued his charade, feigning despondency as he watched Vanessa's reactions closely. Each encounter felt like a battle between his desire for reassurance and the growing chasm between them. Meanwhile, Gabriel could see the toll it was taking on both Emmanuel and Vanessa, who seemed to retreat further into herself with each passing day. One evening, Gabriel found Vanessa in the garden, sitting on a stone bench under the bougainvillea, staring blankly at the flowers. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, as if sleep had long abandoned her. He hesitated before approaching, but her voice called out to him before he could turn back. "Gabriel?" she murmured without looking up. "Have you ever felt like you're losing something you thought was secure?" Gabriel sat beside her cautiously, his hands clasped in his lap. "I think everyone has moments like that, madam. Especially when life changes in ways we didn't expect." She glanced at him, her gaze weary but filled with a quiet determination. "It feels like Emmanuel is slipping away, like he's hiding something from me, and I don't know what I've done wrong." Her voice broke, and she quickly wiped away a tear, struggling to keep her composure. I feel like I'm failing him somehow. Gabriel's heart twisted. He had been by Emmanuel's side for years, witnessing the man's highs and lows, but this plan felt wrong to him, even if he understood the fears that drove it. Yet, he couldn't betray Emmanuel's trust, nor could he bear to see Vanessa in such turmoil. Sometimes people distance themselves not because of anything you've done, he said gently, but because of their own fears or insecurities. Emmanuel loves you, madam. Don't forget that. She managed a small, grateful smile, though her sadness remained. Thank you, Gabriel. I just wish he'd trust me enough to tell me the truth. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his subtle encroachment into Vanessa's life. His messages grew more frequent, yet he never pressed too hard, always careful to keep his tone light and sympathetic. The guise of friendship had been his inroad, but his intentions were far from innocent. He knew Vanessa was growing increasingly isolated, and with Emmanuel's calculated coldness pushing her away, he saw an opening to deepen the wedge between them. One evening, Daniel invited her to lunch under the pretense of discussing a charity event she was involved in. She accepted, hoping that a familiar face might ease her worries, even if that face belonged to one of Emmanuel's rivals. At lunch, Daniel was all charm and sensitivity, listening attentively as Vanessa spoke of her struggles, her uncertainty, and her fears. He never probed, the sen only offered a compassionate ear and a few carefully chosen words of encouragement. You know, Vanessa, he said gently, leaning forward, you deserve happiness and stability. Sometimes in life, we find ourselves clinging to something that no longer serves us, all because we're afraid of letting go. His words stung, hitting a nerve she hadn't been prepared to confront. She looked down at her drink, feeling a mixture of shame and relief that someone finally acknowledged her pain. I don't know, Daniel, she whispered. I feel like I'm constantly fighting to hold on to a love that's slipping through my fingers. He placed a hand over hers, his gaze soft. You don't have to fight alone. Sometimes stepping back gives you clarity. It lets you see if what you're holding on to is worth it. The words lingered in her mind long after she'd left the lunch. Daniel's attention and understanding had felt comforting, even if she knew she shouldn't place her trust in him. But she couldn't deny that his words echoed the doubts already taking root in her heart. That night, as she lay beside Emmanuel in bed, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. She wanted to reach out, to break through the wall he'd built, but every time she tried, he seemed to withdraw even further. She turned to face him, the words on the tip of her tongue. Emmanuel, she whispered, hoping he was still awake. He opened his eyes but didn't turn to her. Yes? Do you still trust me? The question left her lips before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted asking, fearing his answer. Emmanuel was silent for a moment, his jaw clenched as he considered his response. Why would you ask me that? He replied, his tone guarded. Because, she swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady. Because you seem so far away, as if you don't believe I'm here for you. I can't help but feel like I'm being pushed out. He turned to her then, his expression unreadable, and for a fleeting moment, she thought he might open up. But the vulnerability she longed to see was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. Vanessa, he said, his voice cold, you wouldn't understand. Just trust me when I say it's for the best. She recoiled, hurt and confused. For the best? Emmanuel, we're supposed to be partners. I don't understand why you feel the need to shut me out. Without another word, he turned away, leaving her staring at his back, feeling more alone than ever. She lay awake long into the night, her mind racing with doubts and questions that had no answers. The days blurred together, each one more strained than the last. Vanessa found herself confiding more in Gabriel, seeking comfort in his quiet wisdom. Gabriel, for his part, grew increasingly torn, his loyalty to Emmanuel clashing with his sympathy for Vanessa's pain. He knew the test was meant to prove her loyalty, but watching her suffer left him feeling complicit in a lie he didn't believe in. One afternoon, Gabriel drove her to a quiet cafe, where she sat by the window, staring out as the rain began to fall. He watched her from a distance, his heart heavy with guilt. Madam, he said softly, breaking the silence as he offered her an umbrella when the rain worsened. For what it's worth, I believe you're doing everything you can. You have a good heart, Don't let this situation make you doubt yourself. She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and nodded. Thank you, Gabriel. I don't know what I'd do without you. At that moment, he wanted to tell her everything, to reveal the truth behind Emmanuel's coldness. But he held his tongue, knowing it wasn't his place. Instead, he stood by, silently vowing to protect her in whatever way he could. That evening, Emmanuel received a message from Alex, informing him that rumors about his supposed financial collapse were spreading quickly. Some of his business associates had even begun pulling out of deals, worried about the stability of his company. Alex warned him that the deception was taking on a life of its own and urged him to be cautious. Emmanuel, this is getting dangerous, Alex cautioned over the phone. Your plan to test Vanessa is backfiring. You're losing more than just her trust. You're jeopardizing everything you've built. Emmanuel's grip tightened on the phone, but he refused to back down. I need to know, Alex. If Vanessa truly loves me, she'll stay, even if everything crumbles. But Alex's words weighed heavily on him as he sat alone in his office that night, the city lights flickering beyond the windows. For the first time, he felt the edges of doubt creeping into his own heart, wondering if he had taken things too far. As the web of lies tightened around them, Vanessa found herself at a crossroads, torn between the man she loved and the man he had become. The cracks in their marriage had deepened, and her growing friendship with Daniel had only complicated matters. She knew that her loyalty was being tested, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being manipulated, pushed to her breaking point. In the coming days, Vanessa would face the most difficult choice of her life, a choice that would either prove her loyalty or shatter their relationship beyond repair. Vanessa's mind felt like a labyrinth of questions and suspicions, each twisting turn leading to more confusion. Emmanuel's distant behavior, his cryptic responses, and now Daniel's quiet support had left her in a state of emotional turmoil. For days, she had held out hope that Emmanuel would finally confide in her, share the burden that seemed to weigh so heavily on his shoulders. But each attempt to bridge the gap only left her feeling more isolated. On an overcast morning, as she sat on the porch, her phone buzzed. It was her brother, Kofi, checking in as he did every week. Sensing her fatigue in her short replies, he insisted they meet, offering a much-needed break from the suffocating tension at home. They met at a small, quiet cafe near the coast, the sound of waves crashing in the background lending a sense of calm that Vanessa hadn't felt in weeks. She barely managed a smile as she greeted him, her exhaustion evident. Kofi frowned, his protective instincts immediately kicking in. Vanessa, what's going on? You look like you haven't slept in days. She forced a smile, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. I'm fine, Kofi. It's just things at home are a bit tense. He studied her for a long moment, concern clouding his expression. Is it Emmanuel? She hesitated, then nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. He's different, distant. It's like he's shutting me out of his life, and I don't know why. He keeps telling me to trust him, but he won't even talk to me. Kofi's face hardened. Vanessa, that doesn't sound right. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, not some twisted game of secrets. Have you considered maybe he's testing you? She looked at him, startled. Testing me? Why would he do that? Kofi leaned in, his voice lowering. I don't know, but it sounds like he's pushing you to see how far you'll go for him. That's not love, Vanessa. That's manipulation. Her heart sank, his words igniting fears she had tried to push aside. I don't want to believe that, Kofi, but I can't ignore what's been happening. He won't let me in, and I feel like I'm losing him. Kofi placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze unwavering. Then maybe it's time to take a step back. You don't have to stay in a situation that makes you question your worth. Love shouldn't make you feel like this. Vanessa looked away, the waves crashing in the distance, mirroring the chaos within her. She nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. You're right. I can't keep waiting for him to decide if I'm worthy of his trust. I deserve better than this. That evening, Vanessa returned home with a newfound clarity, though her heart was heavy. Emmanuel was in his study, as he often was these days, his back turned as he stared out the window. She hesitated in the doorway, steeling herself before speaking. Emmanuel, we need to talk. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. What is it, Vanessa? She took a deep breath, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. I can't keep doing this. You're shutting me out, keeping secrets, testing me. Whatever it is you're going through, I can't be here if you don't trust me enough to be honest. He clenched his jaw, his eyes flickering with a mix of anger and regret. Vanessa, it's complicated. You wouldn't understand. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. Try me. I deserve at least that much, don't I? For a moment, he seemed to soften, the tension in his shoulders easing as if he might finally let her in. But then his gaze hardened, and he turned away. I told you, Vanessa, some things are better left unsaid. Her heart broke at his words, the finality in his tone piercing through her. She took a step back, her voice trembling. Then maybe this isn't the marriage I thought it was. I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me. As she turned to leave, a flicker of panic crossed Emmanuel's face. He reached out, grabbing her arm gently, his expression conflicted. Vanessa, please, just give me time. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with hurt. Time for what, Emmanuel? For me to prove my love? Or for you to decide if you even believe in it? He released her arm, his hand dropping to his side, defeated. She turned and walked away, the sound of her footsteps fading as she left him alone in the dim light of the study. Later that night, Daniel's message came through, his words offering a sliver of comfort Vanessa desperately needed. I'm here for you, Vanessa. Remember, you don't have to face this alone. For the first time, she allowed herself to respond, feeling the need for a friend who could understand her struggles. They agreed to meet the following day, and as she read his message, she felt both a pang of guilt and a strange sense of relief. Emmanuel's distance had left a void that Daniel seemed all too willing to fill. The next afternoon, they met at a quiet restaurant where Daniel listened intently as Vanessa shared her fears and frustrations. He offered understanding, his gaze sympathetic, his words reassuring. She knew she should be cautious, but his presence felt like a balm for her wounded heart. Vanessa, he said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand, you deserve to be happy. Don't let anyone make you feel less than what you are. She nodded, her gaze downcast. I just don't understand why he's doing this. I've tried so hard to be there for him, to show him I love him, but he's pushing me away. Daniel's expression hardened slightly, though he masked it with a gentle smile. Some men don't realize what they have until it's gone. Maybe it's time you stopped waiting for him to change. His words echoed Kofi's, and as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she felt a small spark of confidence returning. She didn't know where her path would lead, but for the first time, she felt the courage to consider a future without the constant struggle for Emmanuel's approval. Back at home, Gabriel watched with a heavy heart as Vanessa continued to withdraw. He could see the toll the deception was taking on her, and his loyalty to Emmanuel felt more burdensome than ever. He wrestled with his conscience, knowing that every day he stayed silent, he was complicit in her pain. Finally, one evening, he knocked on Emmanuel's study door, his face set with quiet determination. Sir, may I speak with you? Emmanuel looked up, his expression weary. What is it, Gabriel? Gabriel took a deep breath, gathering his courage. With all due respect, sir, I believe this test, it's causing more harm than good. Madame Vanessa is suffering, and I can't stand by and watch her pain anymore. Emmanuel's gaze darkened, his voice cold. I know what I'm doing, Gabriel. She needs to prove her love, and if she truly loves me, she'll stay. But at what cost, sir? Gabriel's voice softened, his eyes filled with regret. Love doesn't thrive on suspicion, and trust isn't something you can force. You're driving her away, and soon it may be too late to bring her back. Emmanuel's face tightened, but doubt flickered in his eyes. I appreciate your concern, Gabriel, but this is my choice, and I will deal with the consequences. Gabriel bowed his head, feeling the weight of failure. He had tried to help Vanessa in the only way he could, but Emmanuel's resolve was unshakable. The only thing he could do now was wait and hope that Emmanuel would see reason before it was too late. As the days passed, Vanessa found herself increasingly drawn to the idea of moving on, away from the heartache and confusion that had come to define her marriage. She began to consider the possibility of a life without Emmanuel, one where she could find peace and happiness on her own terms. But before she could make a final decision, The truth of Emmanuel's deception would come to light in a way neither of them could have anticipated, revealing secrets that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the bonds they shared. In the end, Vanessa would be faced with a choice: to forgive Emmanuel for his betrayal or to leave him behind, forever severing the ties of a love built on fragile foundations. The tension between Vanessa and Emmanuel had reached an unbearable peak. Days passed in silence, each of them wrapped in their own pain, both too proud or too afraid to bridge the distance. But Emmanuel's plan, which had spiraled beyond his control, was about to unravel in a way he hadn't anticipated. One evening, Vanessa sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone, trying to distract herself from the ever-present ache in her chest. A message from Daniel appeared, offering his familiar reassurance. "I'm here if you need anything. Remember, you're not alone in this." As she read his words, a sense of resolve took hold. She couldn't continue living in limbo, clinging to a man who seemed intent on pushing her away. She needed answers, and if Emmanuel wouldn't give them to her willingly, she would have to find another way. The following morning, as Emmanuel prepared to leave for the office, Vanessa stopped him at the door, her expression calm but determined. "Emmanuel, we need to talk." He hesitated, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "I'm running late. Can this wait?" She shook her head, her voice steady. "No, it can't. Not anymore. I deserve to know what's going on, and I won't let you keep shutting me out. Either you tell me the truth, or I'm done." Her ultimatum left him visibly shaken, but he quickly masked it with his usual stoicism. "Vanessa, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Things are just difficult right now." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she struggled to hold back her anger. "Difficult? Emmanuel, you've been lying to me, hiding things from me, testing me. I feel like a stranger in my own home. What kind of marriage is this?" He looked away, his expression conflicted. For a brief moment, she thought he might finally open up, but his walls remained firmly in place. He sighed, his voice barely a whisper. "Vanessa, you wouldn't understand." A bitter laugh escaped her. "You keep saying that. You don't trust me enough to tell me the truth, but you expect me to just accept it?" The silence stretched between them, heavy and tense. Vanessa's heart pounded as she waited, hoping he would finally give her the answers she so desperately needed. But when he spoke, his voice was cold, detached. "I'm doing this to protect myself, Vanessa. You wouldn't understand what it's like to be betrayed, to have people in your life only because of what you can give them." Her face fell, the hurt and betrayal she had been suppressing finally rising to the surface. "You really think that's why I'm here? After everything we've been through, you still doubt me?" He looked away, unwilling to face the pain in her eyes. "I needed to be sure, Vanessa. I needed to know that you loved me, not just the life I could provide." The truth hit her like a punch to the gut, the realization sinking in with devastating clarity. So this whole thing, the financial trouble, the secrecy, it was all just a test? Emmanuel nodded, unable to look at her. "I didn't know any other way." Her anger flared, her voice rising as she took a step back. "You manipulated me, made me feel like I was losing you, all because you couldn't trust me? Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" He finally met her gaze, his face filled with regret. "Vanessa, But she cut him off, shaking her head in disbelief. "I loved you, Emmanuel. I stood by you, tried to be there for you, and you repaid me by making me feel worthless. All for a test?" The hurt in her voice was unmistakable, and Emmanuel felt a pang of guilt so deep it nearly overwhelmed him. "I never meant to hurt you. I've been hurt before. I couldn't risk it happening again." Her gaze hardened. "So you hurt me instead? You let me think I was losing you, all because you couldn't trust me? What kind of love is that?" Emmanuel's shoulders slumped, his defenses crumbling as he took a step toward her. "Vanessa, please. I didn't know how else to protect myself. I was afraid." But she backed away, her expression resolute. "Maybe it's time you learn that love doesn't come with guarantees. It requires trust, vulnerability, and you've shown me that you're not willing to give me either." Devastated, Vanessa left the house, her mind racing as she tried to process everything that had just unfolded. She drove aimlessly through the city, her thoughts consumed by the betrayal she felt. For weeks, she had been tormented by doubts, only to discover that they had been planted by the one person she thought she could trust. Eventually, she found herself parked by the coast, the waves crashing against the shore mirroring the turmoil within her. She sat there for hours, staring at the ocean, the weight of Emmanuel's deception sinking in. She thought of Daniel's words, of Kofi's warnings, of Gabriel's quiet support. They had all seen what she couldn't, that her love for Emmanuel had been one-sided, that he would never trust her as she had trusted him. As the sun began to set, she made a decision. She couldn't stay in a marriage built on suspicion and manipulation. She needed to reclaim her life, to find a path that didn't involve constantly proving her worth. When Vanessa returned home that evening, she was greeted by Gabriel, who immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. He sensed the resolve in her expression, the quiet determination that had replaced her previous uncertainty. "Madam, are you all right?" he asked softly. She looked at him, offering a small, weary smile. "Thank you, Gabriel, for everything, but I can't do this anymore." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'm sorry, madam. I truly am." With that, she headed upstairs, packing her belongings with a calm that surprised even her. Emmanuel appeared in the doorway, his face pale as he watched her gather her things. "Vanessa, please don't do this," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. I'll make it right, I promise." She paused, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Emmanuel, I loved you with everything I had. But love without trust, it doesn't work. You should have trusted me." He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust back. Just give me a chance." But she shook her head, her expression pained but resolute. "I can't keep waiting for you to see my worth, Emmanuel. I deserve someone who doesn't need to test my love to believe in it." With that, she left, leaving Emmanuel alone in the silence of their once happy home. As she closed the door behind her, he felt the crushing weight of regret settle over him, realizing too late the cost of his fears. Emmanuel's world collapsed after Vanessa's departure. Each day felt like an empty echo of the last, his mansion now a hollow shell of memories and lost dreams. He threw himself into his work, trying to drown out the guilt and self-loathing, but nothing could fill the void left by her absence. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Emmanuel came to understand the depth of his mistake. His obsession with control and self-preservation had cost him the one person who had truly loved him. The test he had devised had only served to reveal his own insecurities and fears, laying bare the weaknesses he had tried so hard to hide. In a desperate attempt to make amends, Emmanuel poured his heart into letters, emails, and countless messages to Vanessa, hoping to express the depth of his regret. He offered apologies, explanations, anything he thought might convince her to give him a second chance. But Vanessa remained steadfast in her silence, focusing on healing and rediscovering herself outside of the shadow cast by his betrayal. As the months passed, Emmanuel was forced to confront his own demons, the insecurities that had driven him to test Vanessa's love rather than trust it. He sought counseling, a last attempt to understand the emotional scars that had led him to such drastic measures. Through therapy, he began to piece together a past riddled with fears of abandonment and betrayal that had haunted him long before Vanessa entered his life. Facing these hidden wounds forced Emmanuel to confront the uncomfortable truth. He had been living in the grip of his own insecurities, projecting his fears onto the woman who had loved him unconditionally. In his sessions, Emmanuel came to understand the patterns that had driven his actions. He began to grasp how he had sabotaged his own happiness in the name of self-protection, his fear of vulnerability costing him the one relationship that had mattered most. Meanwhile, Vanessa was slowly rebuilding her life. She moved to a small apartment on the coast, surrounded by friends and family who offered her the love and support she had so desperately needed. The peace she found in solitude allowed her to rediscover her passions, from painting to volunteering at a local youth center. Each day brought her a little closer to reclaiming the confidence and self-worth she had once sacrificed for Emmanuel's love. Daniel, who had initially been a comforting presence during her struggles, eventually showed his true intentions. The more time she spent around him, the more Vanessa sensed his subtle attempts to pull her into a relationship that felt transactional, conditional, echoing the very dynamic she had left behind. Recognizing the red flags, she distanced herself from Daniel, realizing that true love couldn't thrive in the presence of manipulation, however disguised it may be. As the anniversary of their separation approached, Emmanuel made one final gesture of atonement. He had spent months working with a non-profit organization to establish a housing project for low-income families in Accra, dedicating his resources to something beyond his own ambitions. He named it Vanessa's Haven, a tribute to the woman who had once been his heart and soul, hoping that wherever she was, she would see his effort to change. Word of the project reached Vanessa, who was touched by the sincerity behind it. Although she still carried the scars of Emmanuel's betrayal, she couldn't deny the transformation he seemed to be undergoing. His efforts, she realized, weren't about winning her back, but about becoming a better man, one who could face his fears without tearing others down. One sunny afternoon, Vanessa decided to visit the housing project, curious to see the impact of Emmanuel's efforts. She walked through the neighborhood, watching families settle into their new homes, children playing in the yards, and elders sitting together on porches, laughing and reminiscing. It was a world away from the opulence and luxury she had known with Emmanuel, yet it filled her with a quiet sense of peace. As she stood watching, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Emmanuel, his face lined with humility and a vulnerability she had never seen before. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of the past suspended in the silence between them. "Vanessa," he began, his voice gentle, filled with remorse, "I didn't expect to see you here." She offered a small smile, her gaze steady. "I wanted to see what you were doing. It's beautiful, Emmanuel. You've done something truly good here." He looked down, his hands trembling slightly. "I couldn't undo the hurt I caused you, but I wanted to find a way to give back, to do something meaningful. You taught me what love really is, Vanessa. I just wish I hadn't been too blinded by my fears to see it." She nodded, her expression softening. "I'm glad you found a way to heal. I hope you continue down this path. You deserve peace, Emmanuel. We both do." A silence fell over them, filled with a bittersweet nostalgia for what might have been. Emmanuel searched her eyes, his heart pounding as he finally let go of his last hope for reconciliation. He knew now that he had to set her free, to allow her the happiness he hadn't been able to give. "Thank you, Vanessa," he said softly, "for everything. I'll always carry the love we shared with me, even if it took me too long to understand it." With a final understanding nod, Vanessa turned and walked away, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Emmanuel watched her until she disappeared from sight, a quiet acceptance settling over him. In the weeks that followed, Emmanuel continued his work, dedicating himself to causes that helped others rebuild their lives as he was rebuilding his own. Vanessa, in turn, found peace and fulfillment in her own journey, the experience teaching her the importance of self-worth and resilience. Their paths would forever be intertwined by the lessons they had learned, each of them carrying forward the love that had once connected them, now transformed into a quiet strength. Though they no longer shared a life together, Vanessa and Emmanuel remained grateful for the paths they had traveled, paths that had taught them the true meaning of love, trust, and redemption. Their story became a reminder that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome the walls we build around ourselves, but it can lead us to the healing we need to move forward. In the end, Unmasking the Heart was a story of love lost and wisdom gained, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of self-discovery.